Now, on Race to Save the Planet, the modern world, the comfortable consumer lifestyle. But the environment pays a price, like the polluted air of Los Angeles, where the world first discovered smog.
They want to know what is it out there, what's forming it, and how do we clean it up.
And like the polluted waters of the Rhine River, which drains Europe's industrial heartland, we're contaminating our air and water. We're destroying nature and harming ourselves in the process. Do we really want to live this way?
Major funding for Race to Save the Planet is provided by the Annenberg CPB Project and public television viewers. Corporate funding is provided by Ocean Spray. Our continuing aim is to preserve and protect what we cannot create. Additional funding is provided by Jessie Smith Noyes Foundation, Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, and Carnegie Corporation of New York, and by the following.
We have such short memories, don't we? Especially for things which unfold over the course of a generation or so, as is often the case with environmental problems. Back in the 20s, the reason movie makers set up shop in Hollywood was the beautiful, clear desert air. Nowadays, the smog makes your eyes water, and it's often too thick to see across town anyway. It's the same in Europe with the Rhine River. At the beginning of the century, it was a fisherman's paradise. Over 150 different kinds of fish. Today, it's down to 12. Yet millions of people in Los Angeles and along the Rhine accept degraded air and water as the cost of modern living. This episode of Race to Save the Planet is about the effects this pollution is having on nature and on people. We chose Los Angeles and the Rhine because they're so well known, but they're not unusual. We could have made the same program about hundreds of cities and rivers in the world today.
On board a research vessel off the coast of Holland, biologist Peter Reinders is searching for the disappearing North Sea seals. There are still a few to be seen, although once there were thousands. The seals have fallen victim to pollution. Pollution that begins in Europe's industrial heartland, is carried for hundreds of miles down the great river Rhine, and then flows out to sea. The seals died for this: the luxurious lifestyle which consumes the endless products of modern industry. The lifestyle of affluence.
Look at these!
The consumer lifestyle stretches across the world.
Here too.
But wherever it's found, the environment always pays the price. In the mountains above Los Angeles, these stands of ponderosa pine are studied by forester Paul Miller. The trees are sick and dying, like the North Sea seals, victims of pollution that's come from far away. Is damage to the environment an inevitable part of our world today? Blue skies, warm, sunny weather, the promise of golden opportunities, the lure of Los Angeles. Hoping to share in its glamour and wealth, one of every 20 Americans lives here now. 5% of the U.S. population looking for an active lifestyle, a chance to create a personal paradise. But all is not right here in Eden. There's been explosive growth in recent decades. People flooding in from around the country and the world. So today, the nation's worst air pollution is an inescapable part of the LA lifestyle. Pollution from the factories and businesses, the cars and homes that make the lifestyle possible. 12 million people live in the Los Angeles basin, a 13,000 square mile area bounded by mountains. The mountains act as a natural trap for polluted air as it accumulates. This dramatic time-lapse view looking down from the mountains reveals what happens to Los Angeles air on a typical day. 8 a.m., the drive to work has begun. Factories and businesses open. Polluting gases start to build. It's a summer day, and by mid-morning the gases are trapped under the usual warm inversion layer. There's no doubt by noon, it's another smoggy day in Los Angeles. As afternoon wears on, enough gases have accumulated in the basin to reach right up into the mountains. It'll be late evening before the smog breaks up. And then tomorrow, Los Angeles residents will go through the whole cycle once again.
When I come over the hill in the morning, it's like a blanket. It is so disgusting. I'd like tell my husband, don't breathe today.
What I really hate about it is it makes my eyes burn.
When it's smoggy, it makes you embarrassed that people come to visit here.
Just want to sit down and not do much. It takes a lot of the steam out of you.
We have pretty mountains, and with the smog, it covers it up, and you want to see them, and it looks really disgusting.
Yet, these problems stem from the typical modern lifestyle.
Come on, Slug, let's have breakfast.
The Matz family prepares to meet another polluted day living in the center of Los Angeles. Don and his wife, Judy, leave for work at different times and in separate cars, as does their older son, Scott. So 3 people contribute 3 cars to the 3.5 million on Los Angeles highways during the morning commute. 2 hours a day commuting on ever more crowded freeways. There's a higher price tag attached to the California lifestyle than when Judy was growing up. After the war, Los Angeles' growth really took off. When the freeways opened in the 50s, the air was already showing signs of stress, as chemistry professor Jim Pitts recalls.
The real impacts of what we now call photochemical smog really began to appear in the late 40s. They appeared in several ways. 1, eye irritation, tearing. 2, cracking of rubber. One could have one's fishing boots, and they would crack in the matter of months, or the runs rubber tires, and that was an interesting phenomenon. And then the crops. Los Angeles, when I grew up, was surrounded by field crops of all kinds, lettuce, orange groves, and so forth. The crops were being impacted by something, and it wasn't clear what it was.
Plant scientists couldn't recognize any disease in this crop damage, so they began looking for some kind of corrosive agent in the air, perhaps the same thing that was causing such widespread eye irritation.
The public were furious. They wanted to know, what is it out there, what's forming it, and how do we clean it up?
The most obvious suspects were the highly visible emissions from industrial smokestacks and backyard garbage burning. But after local government began to control these in the 50s, the bad air persisted. Around this time, a Dutch organic chemist at Caltech, R.E. Hagensmit, was working on the problem. In laboratory experiments, he'd seen how a gas called ozone caused the same kind of plant damage occurring in the fields. The mystery was nothing around gave off much ozone. It must be forming indirectly from other gases in the atmosphere. So he started experiments on combining gases, including the ones from cars.
He had a hunch that let's take hydrocarbons from cars and oxides of nitrogen, let's put them together and see what happens. He put them together, nothing happened. Then he said, aha, we have a sun in Southern California, around the world in the summertime. Put an artificial light on, ultraviolet light, and bingo, you had photochemical smog.
Photochemical smog, first identified in Los Angeles, now recognized around the world. For the first time, cars were seen as major polluters. The manufacturers were quick to react, as state auto emissions scientist Art Hocker recalls.
I think the first reaction of industry was this man really didn't know what he was talking about. Let's put all of our laboratories on the path and disproving.
But extensive testing only confirmed automotive exhausts were reacting to form ozone in the atmosphere. And the automakers were not the only ones upset by the news.
The people wanted to blame everything else but themselves for air pollution in those days. This was a California lifestyle. And you're not going to interfere with that lifestyle by saying that something's coming out of the tailpipe or the crankcase blow-by, or even when their car's sitting and fumes are evaporating from the carburetor, that this is producing smog? Not on your life, Buster.
Art Hocker was in at the start of California's pioneering Air Resources Board. Before long, the public accepted the need for controls on car exhausts, and soon the board decided uncontrolled car emissions had to stop.
This is a 1963 California vehicle. It is typical of the engines that were in existence at the time of the real bad smog periods in Southern California. There are basically no emission controls whatsoever on this engine. It predates our controls.
In subsequent years, California insisted that car makers develop a host of new control technologies.
And this is a 1982 model California vehicle, 19 model years later than the uncontrolled car we first saw. This represents a combination of under-the-hood technology with the addition of a catalytic converter, such as the one I have here.
The catalytic converter promotes a complex series of chemical reactions which reduce a car's emissions by over 90%. California introduced them in 1975, and they were soon adopted nationally, and now internationally as well.
This catalyst has probably done more than any other single device towards cleaning up exhaust emissions from automobiles in the entire United States.
Today, 35 monitoring stations keep track of the many different pollutants found in Los Angeles air. This clean white filter will be used to collect tiny airborne particles over the next 24 hours. Such particles have multiple sources: cars, trucks, power plants, factories. All the filters end up here at this regional laboratory, where Marjol Wadley, the director, has seen how air quality has changed over the last 20 years. The filter shows that in spite of all efforts, the quality of Los Angeles air is still shockingly bad.
The particulate matter on this filter is pretty bad, but it's typical of today here. If it's any consolation, we have made some progress over the last 20 years.
This 20-year-old filter is much worse, in part because of the success of the stringent auto emissions controls. So, in 20 years, airborne particles have been reduced, and ozone has too. But, it seems, that's not good enough. Over those 20 years, forestry professor Paul Miller has studied the trees up here in the San Bernardino Mountains nearly 100 miles from Los Angeles. He sees the same kind of forest damage that's so widespread in industrialized countries today. Acid rain is the likely culprit in many areas, but here it's ozone from Los Angeles. In both cases, the pollution affects areas far removed from the source. The symptoms, yellow sparse needles, are sadly familiar to foresters in Europe, Scandinavia, and America.
This is a ponderosa pine branch with its normal complement of foliage. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 annual needle whorls. And in this case, it has sufficient surface area to make the energy that it needs for life. On the other hand, with this branch, which is ozone damaged, it's reduced down to only 2 annual whorls, so it has a limited capacity for producing the energy that it needs to survive, and eventually will become debilitated and weakened and perhaps killed by other agents. This is the ultimate fate of larger ponderosa pine trees here in the San Bernardino National Forest. These trees are at least 300 years old, and it's only been in the last 30 years that they've been chronically exposed to ozone, something that's a result of our industrial society here in the Los Angeles basin. And now they've been killed not by ozone alone, but because ozone has weakened them, and they're now susceptible to their natural enemies, which are mainly the bark beetles in this case. So we have then lost a very important resource, something that people value here in this forest, something that is really a living monument to be seen for future generations.
So air pollution is an insidious force in this forest. It doesn't kill, it weakens. What might it be doing to people? At the University of California, lung specialist Henry Gong and his colleagues are asking that precise question. In the laboratory, an athlete in excellent condition will take on an easy task. Alternate 15-minute periods of rest and light exercise over the course of 3 hours. But he's in a chamber containing the amount of ozone that corresponds to the worst Los Angeles smog alert.
How are you feeling?
Feeling pretty good. Got a little eye irritation. I noticed a little sputum production. Feel a little bit right here, just a tickle. Otherwise, I'm fine.
Ozone exposure acutely can certainly cause shortness of breath, a dry cough, a wet cough, chest pain, particularly when one is taking a deep breath in. Can also cause wheezing in some individuals, nausea, and headache.
1 hour into the test.
How are you feeling?
A lot of coughing. Can't take a full breath. It's tight up here. Runny nose.
I believe that my results from acute exposures of ozone certainly indicate that it can be a detrimental health effect.
1 hour short of the mark, the young athlete calls it quits. The high ozone level has taken its toll. Los Angeles' 12 million people are occasionally exposed to levels this high, and frequently to lower levels. But what effect such exposures could have over the long term is just not known. Out of exhaust pipes like these come thousands of other chemicals which citizens of the industrialized world and their children breathe every day. Factory emissions are breathed like ozone at low levels and for a lifetime. Usually the consequences are unknown. This Los Angeles plating factory, for example, has been releasing small amounts of chromium for about 30 years. But the chemical was only recently recognized as a carcinogen. The emissions were neither regulated nor even for a long time detected. It's only in the 80s that equipment like this at the regional laboratory has become widespread. It detects chemicals at very low levels, like the chromium from the factory. That's allowed epidemiologist Paul Papanak to calculate the effect of the emissions.
Chrome itself is responsible for an increased lifetime risk of cancer in people that live near that factory. And that's because chrome is a fairly potent carcinogen compared to other environmental carcinogens. If you live in that community for your entire life, there's about a 1 in 10,000 to maybe even as high as 1 in 1,000 chance that you would get cancer because of your proximity to that factory.
In 1988, the school was informed of the risk. Suddenly, life changed for children and teachers.
It becomes very difficult when you go to work and you have this underlying stress or this underlying feeling of, I wonder what's blowing from the east over there. Half of my day, plus my weekends, are away from this environment. The children are here all the time.
I cannot just be coming every day, and be happy that I'm coming to this place where so many good experiences have happened. Because it may not be good for me, it may not be good for anybody who is around.
The factory is now installing filters that will remove over 90% of the emissions. The health risk will be much lower, but it will still be there, as it will from thousands of other factories, millions of cars. For Paul Papanak, this raises questions about the very nature of the society we live in.
Do we have to have chrome or petrochemicals or benzene or other chemicals in the environment instead of just saying, well, do more filters on the smokestack do the job for us? we really can take a step backward and say, well, in the first place, why are we making these things? Once you've begun to ask those questions, of course, you're into a huge. Then you start saying, well, should we be making them at all? Can we locate elsewhere? Can the pollutants go into the air or the soil or the water? We're way beyond science at that point. We're into public policy.
Just as Los Angeles led the world in recognizing photochemical smog and in then regulating cars, it's now trying to think its way out of the mess of the industrial city.
Temperatures are expected to be scorching throughout the LA basin.
Jim Lentz is the new director of the South Coast Air Quality Management District, the agency that's developing a new plan for cleaning up Los Angeles air. A newcomer to the area, Jim already pays a personal price for the Los Angeles lifestyle. He's developed an allergy to smog, which needs treatment every day.
Yeah.
Look over here at me. I get it?
Yeah, I think so.
Here.
Yeah.
Jim already does one thing the whole region will be required to do. He carpools to work,
Good morning, Dr. Lentz. How are you this morning?
along with 3 other office colleagues.
Not so bad that we get
In Los Angeles, under the new plan, the days of one car, one commuter are numbered.
A little easier for everybody.
Good morning. Good morning.
As usual, the day begins with a decision on the issuing of a smog warning. For Jim Lentz, it's a mistake to think there's anything unique about Los Angeles. It's a typical large industrial city.
The Los Angeles problem, I don't think, is really unique. I've worked in Tennessee, I've worked in Colorado, and now I've worked in Los Angeles. And in each case, it's the same issue, a mixture of industry, a mixture of small business, a mixture of individuals, and a mixture of automobiles creating the problem.
Industries like this refinery are responsible for about 1/3 of Los Angeles air pollution. And today, Jim Lentz is here to find out how they're going to comply with the plan's tough new regulations, the most severe in the world.
Up on top of this heater that we have over here is one that we built, retrofitted in 1985.
The entire upper half of this unit is like a catalytic converter on a car. Many more will now be needed.
We'll have to put this type of technology on nearly every heater in the yard. There'll be some of the smaller ones we can meet with low NOx burners, but this is the state of the art. It's the thing of the next 10 years.
Even recently built units will have to be upgraded, and that's expensive, although not impossible for large companies.
What do you think the cost of this installation is going to be?
This one will probably cost us about $10 million to retrofit.
Refineries are usually the largest individual polluters in an area, equivalent to about 25,000 cars.
The refineries in this basin are the single largest emitters of air pollution, and thus we've got to work with them to clean up these emissions. A refinery like this can produce literally 10, 20, 30 tons of emissions every day.
While big industry is used to regulation, for the first time, the Los Angeles plan is taking on the 30,000 small businesses like dry cleaners, at present unregulated. The challenge that will present can be seen here, in this car body shop. Every aerosol, every paint can is packed with materials destined for release into the air. Paint booths, often in poor condition now, will have to be completely redesigned to effectively capture the spray and recycle solvents. And of course, a huge enforcement effort will be needed. It'll be costly and unpopular, but for Jim Lentz, there's no alternative.
Small business has got to participate in the cleanup problem because there's a major source of emissions, and you can't solve the problem and leave a major source of emissions going. We think we can help them find ways to reduce pollution in the first place. In fact, one theme that we've tried to incorporate into this plan is not just adding on control equipment to stop emissions, but fundamentally change some of the cleanup processes. Use a cleaner paint when you're painting. Use a paint sprayer that wastes less paint. This way, the small businessman benefits as well as cleans up the air.
Gary Stafford runs a small, fine furniture company in Los Angeles, the second largest center of this industry in America. The plan will probably require water, not solvent-based finishes here, even though they already use high-efficiency spray equipment. Influencing production methods is one way the plant can get results, and Gary Stafford is not happy about it.
Our problem with more regulation is that we have to maintain the quality of our product. And when the regulations come to the point where we have to begin reducing our product quality and we can't compete with out-of-state or foreign competitors, then we have to make a decision to either move or go out of business. We won't be able to sell our product anymore.
Golden State.
In hearing after hearing on the Quality Air Plan, businesses voice those kinds of objections.
We use 100% recycled product as a makeup for our product.
But Jim Lentz and his team are convinced that the new technologies they are encouraging will help Los Angeles in the long run.
Now, what does it mean to use 100%?
We don't think that controlling small business means they've got to go out of business. And every study we do reaches a conclusion just the opposite of that, that actually cleaning up the basin could help the economy. In fact, there's almost a catch-22. You help the economy, you stimulate it, and you create more potential emissions here. But the studies we do actually indicate that the plan we're putting in for Los Angeles would increase jobs overall.
And that's what Los Angeles is going to need. With 6 million more people, an increase of half projected in the next 20 years. But more people mean more cars. Right now, cars produce 2/3 of the region's air pollution, in spite of effective emissions controls. So the prospect is that more cars than ever will wipe out the gains of the past. The short-term solution is compulsory carpooling. But after that, the plan is looking at a whole series of measures stretching out into the next century.
The first stage is to just get cleaner burning fuels into the process, like methanol, like improved gasoline, like compressed natural gas and propane. After that, we enter stage 2 of the program, and that is to actually create and get into operations what are essentially emissions-free vehicles.
This electric-powered van is one example. The theory is that a power plant can burn oil more cleanly than several thousand car engines. Better still, they are hoping that in 20 years, when all power users, including mass transit and even lawnmowers, must be emission-free, electric power generated by sunlight will be available cheaply. Before it's done, there's no part of life in Los Angeles that the plan won't touch.
If you combined what the average individual does in Los Angeles in their home, from doing a barbecue in their backyard, to mowing their lawn, to simply putting on deodorant in the morning, they contribute 100 tons of pollution into the atmosphere every day. And I think a lot of people don't recognize that those little things add up to that amount of emissions.
It's the end of the day, and Don Matz is stuck in traffic on his way home from work in an otherwise empty car. Meanwhile, his wife, Judy, has driven her car to the store, where she's stocking up with consumer products, many of which will soon find their way into Los Angeles air. Scott, at home, is doing some of those little things which, along with everybody else, add up, and up, and up. Under the plan, an aerosol ban is possible. And the Matz's backyard grill is going to have to be gas-fired within 5 years. From big industrial polluters to little domestic ones, the Los Angeles plan is the world's most far-reaching. It'll have to be, if this is again to be a fit place to live. Right now, Don Matz speaks for many residents. You can stay and suffer, or leave and start again.
I could sure get used to getting out of this smog for myself and for my family. It would be a matter of packing up and going someplace and basically starting over again. And maybe that's the thing that concerns me the most, starting over again. We've come this far with our careers and with our family, and that's a big decision, starting over.
Los Angeles air is unhealthy. For the trees in the mountains and the people below, it has reached its limit. Although the plan may succeed in making improvements, for now, the polluted air here and in many industrial cities around the world is part of the cost of comfort. Just as the wonderful climate, the clear desert air were once Los Angeles' prime assets, so this great river was once the glory of Europe. The River Rhine has been celebrated in poetry, in paintings, in music for centuries. It was and is one of the world's greatest tourist attractions. But it's also a major industrial artery. Its banks packed with some of the world's greatest concentrations of factories and the cities that go with them. From its source in Switzerland, the river runs through 6 prosperous European countries before it drains finally through Holland into the North Sea. Along the way, 40 million people make use of the river. The people of Düsseldorf in Germany's industrial heart are typical. It's Saturday morning, and Peter Kramer and Petra Polta, both office workers, are going shopping at a well-known city department store. The wealth of consumer products available to them is something they and their fellow shoppers take for granted. And like consumers everywhere, they give little thought to the complex industrial processes which produce the things they buy. There are audio and videotapes made by one company on the Rhine, BASF. There's photographic film from AGFA, another Rhine company. Just a small part of the thousands of products that generate industrial wealth. But the price of these products is more than financial. Just above the mouth of the Rhine, off the Dutch coast, is the area of sheltered waters and sandbanks known as the Waddenzee. Working in the Waddenzee is this Dutch research vessel. The area, long known for its wildlife, is now a nature reserve. Today, biologist Peter Reinders is searching for one of the reserve's most famous inhabitants. The seals are not easy to find, and there's very little doubt what's wrong.
20 years ago, you could easily find around 150 seals here, and today you have a lot of trouble even to find one single seal. Only in the whole area here, there might be between 15 or 20 seals left, and that's mainly due because of the effect of pollution.
Located at the edge of the Waddenzee, this institute is where Reinders has studied North Sea seals for many years. Seals are vulnerable to water pollution mainly through the enormous quantity of fish they eat. Fish in the Waddenzee are heavily contaminated with toxic PCBs that flowed from the Rhine for 20 years. These chemicals were widely used in plastic and electrical industries around the world. In experiments here, Reinders has fed seals contaminated fish and seen how PCBs accumulate in tissue and blood. One effect is to disrupt the seal's reproduction severely, but there are others too.
Apart from the effects of PCBs on reproduction, we have also found that PCBs have an effect on the defense system of seals against diseases. It means, in fact, that the normal diseases they have got always, that they have much more problems to cope with that.
In 1988, disaster overtook seals all over the North Sea. 16,000 animals, over half the population, succumbed to a virus. Scientists are convinced that pollution had undermined their immune system. With PCBs compromising reproduction as well, the once common North Sea seal is suddenly in trouble. Although PCBs were banned in 1983, they will persist in the environment for years. They and other pollutants travel hundreds of miles from industries along the Rhine. Like the Los Angeles forests, the seals were damaged by the industrial way of life. Its toxic byproducts are picked up by the river on the journey from its source. The river begins with the clean waters of glacial streams in the Swiss Alps. In less than 3 miles, it meanders through the first villages. In 50 miles, it reaches the first city, the first factories. From then on, it's constant industry and people. The Rhine must serve as a drinking water source for 8 million. And it's a huge drain as well. This is the Emscher River, a tributary of the Rhine, which runs through Germany's Ruhr district. About half its flow is industrial waste, and the other half is sewage from the 5 million people who live along it. The Emscher is an open sewer, in effect, a dead river. Dr. Ragnar Kinzelbach specializes in freshwater biology. In a healthy river, any rock should show signs of many forms of life.
The only higher life I can find here on the stones of the Emscher River are larvae, red larvae of waterflies. They indicate that the river has a very low oxygen content, and it has a degree of pollution which is very outstanding. It's the worst degree you usually find outside a sewage plant.
It's a simple process that's killed the Emscher. The river is carrying a heavy load of human and factory waste. Much of it is broken down by natural bacteria, which need oxygen to grow. But here they grow so fast they use up all the oxygen available in the water. As a result, there's none left for fish and other higher life forms, which die off. The Rhine is not as bad as the Emscher, although it used to be. Like many rivers in Europe and America, in recent decades, it's improved a lot, as life in the river shows.
On this rock are several species of animals. For instance, leeches, this one and this one. Another kind of leeches. The first mentioned was a snail feeder. This one is an insect larvae feeder. We find this species of snails. The snails are the prey of some of the leeches.
The dozens of small life forms now back in the river are evidence of a dramatic change.
20 years ago, the Rhine was very heavily polluted. Everybody could smell it, could see it. It was easily visible. The water was dirty and brownish. And even the fish tried to escape. I've seen eel escaping the water, going to the banks, and that came of the lack of oxygen in the water itself. And this time, individuals and groups urged the government very hard to change the situation, and from then on, the improvement began.
Investing heavily in treatment plants was how Germany and many industrial countries achieved the improvement. It was a response to the growing environmental movements of the 60s. First, the solids are settled out as sludge, removing most organic materials and heavy metals that come from factory waste. This plant actually handles the entire Emscher River. Then, in these tanks, natural bacteria are used to break down the waste, the same as would happen in the river. But here, forced aeration speeds up the process. All along the Rhine, towns and factories are now required to operate these plants, greatly reducing the organic wastes and heavy metals in the river. For the past 150 years, the family of one of the Rhine's last commercial fishermen has fished these waters. Hubert Klott today makes his living from eels, because in spite of the improvement, the Rhine has only 12 fish types, compared to 150 a century ago. Many Rhine fish are gone forever.
I'm personally very sad about the loss of diversity, since the end of a species always means the end of a development of millions of years. And it's a bad thing to see that many lines of life just stop at the end of the 20th century. And I hope we can at least part of them make continue into the next century for our children and grandchildren.
For Peter Kramer and Petra Pulte and their daughter Louisa, the Rhine at Dusseldorf has again become a favorite place to enjoy their hours of leisure. But the river environment is constantly vulnerable, as people remember from several years ago. November 1st, 1986, a massive fire lights up the night sky in Basel, Switzerland. A warehouse at the Sandoz Chemical Company is in flames, a warehouse used to store agricultural pesticides. By daybreak, it's clear the fire is a disaster, not so much for the company, but for the Rhine River, by the side of which the warehouse was built. Leaking into the water could be seen a telltale red dye. But more important was the invisible 1,300 tons of pesticides which wiped out the river life downstream for 150 miles. The accident put the 40 chemical companies on the river in the spotlight. Suddenly, the public realized that smaller amounts of toxic chemicals were discharged into the river every day. New laws were the result in several countries along the Rhine. Rotterdam, at the mouth of the river, receives the accumulated flow of pollutants from all the cities and factories upstream. Rotterdam is the world's largest port. It's also itself a center of industry with refineries and factories which make their own polluting contributions to the river. To keep the channels open, the port of Rotterdam dredges constantly. Enough, it's claimed, to give every Dutch citizen 150 buckets of sludge every year. This particular sludge is not exactly desirable, however. As the continuous sampling program shows, it's massively contaminated with toxic chemicals and heavy metals. It's like the river's memory, a record of all that's been casually dumped into it for decades past. They'll have to analyze the sludge before deciding what to do with it. And the reason they have to be so careful can be seen here at the Biological Institute, where the seal and PCB work is done. The bottom of this tank was deliberately covered with a layer of Rotterdam harbor sludge, and then fish were raised in it. They're flounder. They live at the bottom, and they show some appalling effects.
Some fin erosion here.
Running the experiment is Dick Vettok.
Okay, what we got here is a collection of diseased fish. The first one is an example of a viral infection. You can see all sorts of nodules and tumor-like lesions. The second one here is even a more severe case of the same viral infection. A big tumor-like lesion on the fin. This fish has an ulceration. The next one has tail rot. And as you can compare the two of them, you can easily see that the part of the tail fin is totally rotten away.
Occasionally, they see cancer as well. The fish are more vulnerable to disease, like the seals or the forests above Los Angeles.
Contaminant sediments we have in the experiment here contains a lot of potential toxic chemicals which can actually induce disease in fish. The underlying idea is that many of those chemicals actually damage the immune system of the fish and make them more vulnerable to diseases.
The large volumes of Rotterdam harbor sludge pumped off the dredges are just as dangerous to people as to fish, so disposal is a major problem. This is what the Dutch have been forced to do. Dumping into the North Sea is illegal, so they've built this enormous toxic pond along the shore to store sludge. Called a slufter, it costs $100 million to build, and it's going to fill up fast. Harbor engineer Matthew Heinen.
And one could face the question, what after this? What after 15 years when the slufter is filled up? Easy answer could be, then we build another slufter. But we can't go on building slufter after slufter. The real solution of the problem is bringing down pollution level. And that's the reason why we are traveling abroad to other countries, talking with polluters, not only industries, not only chemical industries, but in general, making a program, any place, any time, bringing down, please, pollution level.
The Rhine doesn't end at Rotterdam. It becomes part of the North Sea. 20 miles offshore, this Dutch research ship can easily find the river's telltale signs. Albert Westdijk will use the onboard laboratory to analyze water samples. Although the Rhine is not the only North Sea polluter, it is the largest, especially when it comes to a particular group of chemicals, the nitrates and phosphates. Monitoring the water, they find it's loaded with these pollutants, and that's become of increasing concern in recent years. This is why Europeans have been shocked by beach scenes like this. The foam is not caused by detergent. It's the result of the breakdown of billions of microscopic algae. The North Sea has seen algal blooms, explosive growths of marine organisms, regularly during recent summers. They've been seen off Italian and American coasts too. High nitrate and phosphate levels cause algal blooms because these chemicals act as fertilizers. In fact, many of them started out being applied to farmers' fields on the banks of the Rhine. They also come from sewage plants and industries, and they all end up in the North Sea. Albert Westdyke.
We are on the end of the tube, and everything what someone put in the beginning of the tube comes at the end out, and we must manage it, and we must work with it, and that's a big problem. It gives a lot of problems with the ecosystems.
One especially difficult problem begins here, on the slopes where the world-famous Rhine wines originate. Fritz Hahn and his son Peter are at work in their family vineyard. Like thousands of farmers along the Rhine, from Switzerland to Holland, they use pesticides on the crops and fertilizers on the soil. And like many Europeans, they are well aware of environmental concerns.
Today we use a less amount of fertilizer or spray material, like an eighth of the things my dad was told. We do it because of two reasons. One reason is the economical reasons. It's cheaper for us to fertilize less and spray less. And the second one, more important, is the concern of us about the groundwater. We don't want any pollution of the groundwater that flows finally into the Rhine River.
In spite of this kind of attitude, there will always be some runoff of this kind, short of a revolution in agricultural methods. And short of a revolution in comfortable European lifestyles, people are always going to do this. Petra Polta fertilizes her houseplants and then dumps the leftovers. And people will always do this, wash the pesticides off their fruit. It all ends up in the Rhine, multiplied by 40 million people. As well as its continued service as a giant sewer, the Rhine provides something else, drinking water. Just under this embankment is the extraction point for the city of Amsterdam. Amsterdam has to put its Rhine water through one of the world's most elaborate treatment systems. It starts here with a long series of settling tanks in which contaminating materials sink to the bottom as sediment. At the end of the process, the water is already 98% cleaner. The contaminated sediments are allowed to drain in a plastic-lined pit, and then they're taken away for incineration. But the water won't go direct to Amsterdam. It'll first be pumped underground to an area near the coast, where the most important part of the treatment takes place. It first emerges in this canal, which feeds into about 40 miles of channels and dunes. Here, the water spends about 3 months as it percolates through the sand, gradually shedding the countless Rhine contaminants. But Martin Gast, director of Amsterdam's water system, realizes there is simply no limit to what materials the river water may contain.
It's a kind of race we have to do in our industrialized societies. It's not only a Dutch problem, it's a problem of the whole Western world. You find it in Italy, you find it in England, you find it in the States. Industries are making a lot of products, and we find them back in the environment, and also in the groundwater, in the surface water, and afterwards in the drinking water.
To keep up in the race, they use this sophisticated equipment to monitor the water. Since the Sandoz fire, many Rhine cities have done the same. It's installed here at the Amsterdam Water Systems Laboratories, and it's highly effective, as they found 2 years ago, when scientist Roel Lindout was using the new equipment to identify substances contained in the city water. On the screen, each peak represents a different compound. There are hundreds of them. They're all at very low levels, and they usually come from natural sources, like soil. Lindhout began to identify the peaks one by one. They were all familiar until he got to one he just couldn't explain.
I found something that was that surprised me, for it was looking like a pesticide, and well, pesticides don't belong in the water. They don't belong in drinking water.
Finally, Lindhout was able to confirm his suspicions. Its molecular formula definitely suggested an agricultural chemical. So then it was a question of matching up its structure with one of the 1,000 or so compounds described in the Agrochemicals Handbook. It took another week of painstaking investigation. And finally, he found a perfect molecular structure match. It was bentazone. But thousands of farmers use bentazone. So next, they took a research vessel upriver, sampling regularly along the way, in the hope of pinning down the source. Then, 200 miles up, in Germany, they detected a strong bentazone discharge from the huge BASF chemical complex at Ludwigshafen. The Dutch complained publicly, prompting the companies somewhat skeptically to react. Company spokesman Karl Moller.
When we first heard from Amsterdam that they had found bentazone in their drinking water, we invited them immediately to come here and to discuss the results. We made the appointment to take samples at the same time to make sure that it was real what they have found.
BASF had been producing bentazone for many years in one of the 340 different production units here. They've treated their waste for many years here too. But pesticides just pass right through conventional treatment plants. So almost certainly the bentazone discharge had also gone on for years. Even though the discharge was at low level and legal, as a result of the Dutch pressure, BASF put in a special activated carbon treatment system for bentazone, unnecessarily in the company's view.
We in BASF had to learn that the people in Amsterdam and in the whole Netherlands were much concerned about the bentazone content of their drinking water, and that was the reason why we did as much as we ever could. We have to face the society which we live in, and to do what the society asks us to do. From a scientific point of view, there has never been a toxic danger of this low bentazone content at all.
The company's claim is that all along Amsterdam's drinking water was safe because it met World Health Organization standards. But downstream, Dutch standards are more strict. Only now, with lower discharge, does the water satisfy those. But there's still bentazone in Amsterdam's water, just a tiny trace, along with traces of many other compounds. Martin Gast.
We can measure now at very low concentrations, milligrams, thousands, millions, 1 millionth of a milligram per liter we can measure. And we know that those stuffs are in the water, are in the drinking water. We don't know what are the effects for the health of the people.
All of us who live in the industrialized countries are in this predicament. We know we've damaged the natural world, the seals, the fish, the forests. What we don't know is how much we're damaging ourselves. We all drink contaminated water. We all breathe polluted air. Do we really want to live this way?
This program raises many questions because the problems it is shown are caused by nothing less than our modern lifestyle. So making changes is going to be tough. It may mean some fundamental shifts in the way that we live our lives, but in this series, we're going to talk a lot about realistic ways to make such changes. And there'll be plenty that people like you and me, as individuals, can do. Please join me next time for Race to Save the Planet.
Major funding for Race to Save the Planet is provided by the Annenberg CPB Project and public television viewers. Corporate funding is provided by Ocean Spray. Our continuing aim is to preserve and protect what we cannot create. Additional funding is provided by Jessie Smith Noyes Foundation, Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, and Carnegie Corporation of New York, and by the following. For more information on the college telecourse, video cassettes, off-air videotaping, and books based on the series, call 1-800-LEARNER.
This is PBS.
The Global Ecology Handbook, published by Beacon Press, is available for $16.95 plus shipping. A transcript of this program is available for $5. Please call 1-800-TALK-SHOW or send a check to Race to Save the Planet, Journal Graphics, 267 Broadway, New York, New York, 10007.
Next on Race to Save the Planet, the clash between development and environment. Forests are being lost, air and water poisoned in the fight against poverty. But are there alternatives that don't destroy the environment? Watch In the Name of Progress next time on Race to Save the Planet.